session on Conversations on AI, a haptic initiative for the world's leading minds to exchange thoughts around the business of AI. Our guest today is an author, academician, influencer, serial entrepreneur, and a leader in AI, fintech, digital transformation, and blockchain. He has been listed as one of the 100 B2B thought leaders and influencers to follow in 2020 by Thinkers 360. He's also published numerous books and articles in numerous publications. Pleased to present our esteemed guest today, Dinis Guarda. Welcome, Dinis.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Vikram.
Yes. So, Dinis, I think one of the key things that we want to understand from you is in the world of blockchain and AI. And we've recently read that Accenture reports that banks can achieve a 2 to 5 increase in volumes of interactions or transactions with the same headcounts using AI tools. How essential is the use of AI in the BFSI sector right now?
Well, I think all the sectors, but specifically the BFSI sectors, are going to be increasingly depending of machine learning driven AI software and tools. We are still in the first stage, but these tools are already being increasingly disruptive. I think the challenge right now is how we're going to be doing this between the automation of these tools and the humanity that needs to do these tools. I think one of the challenges a lot of banks have, and I think the best ones is using these tools in a way that targets and tailors their audiences, communities and clients, but as well, they don't lose the humanity that is necessary. I think I would say that the banks that don't use these tools will just disappear. It's just a question of time, and all the financial organizations. And this is happening as we speak, because most of the new startups that have capacity on these areas are taking over the entire global financial ecosystem. And even if you look in terms of blockchain related with AI, we're seeing, especially decentralized finance, which is a lot of these things are automated, already a big jump between decentralized and decentralized systems. So in the case of artificial intelligence, we're not even with artificial intelligence, it's just machine learning and big data management of data kind of alliance in terms of understanding, okay, the client needs this, the client needs that, let's tailor this. I think the challenge right now that I'm seeing, and I think that's the opportunity as well, is a lot of banks have a bit of a schizophrenic approach towards these things. Is that in one end, they have like a department trying to do all of these things, but the rest of the departments don't speak with each other. So I think this brings a bit of a divide, legacy systems with more advanced systems. And it creates a bit of a, okay, the possibilities of AI chatbots mixed with just understanding what the client needs, depends, of course, if you are, because the financial industry has a lot of different things, from if you are in SME or if you are in B2B banking or if you are in trading and investment. For trading and investment, in terms of financial transactions, 90% is done already by machines. And what you have is mostly of the trading and financial big transactions in the world done by computer scientists, quantum scientists, and people that are really looking at trends, market trends, data trends, news trends, and then aligning the efforts to that. And this is going to be increasingly more powerful. And I think right now, this is becoming super disruptive because you can start predicting things almost in real time if you have like good algorithms that can actually pick the markets and the news and sentiments. And of course, the biggest financial organizations in the world will become much bigger. And I can predict here that a couple of computer geeks in a room can actually take over a country. And that is kind of the thing that is partly happening, or take down the economy of a country, which is more dangerous. But I believe as well that for masses and for a lot of companies and for banking, the ones that can align their infrastructure and their tech infrastructure using these AI tools to just automate, but at the same time to tailor service to them, will become much more advanced. And I believe that these systems, from OpenAI's to data systems and tailored systems, can actually make a big difference.
Got it. So does it mean that you need to have the entire ecosystem in the organization to be changed, or is it that you can start off with certain sections and then to continuously progress?
I think it has to be a mix. Okay, I think a lot of these IT systems. So the challenge right now is not just the IT systems; it's the business and the IT systems working together. And I think one big challenge that I find is that there's that we need to tailor a lot of the way the different teams talk with each other. Because, for instance, even me as a client, I see that most of the banks have no logic between the different departments. And if you speak with a department, they will tell you one thing, another department will tell you another thing. And this is a paradox because, of course, you can literally get, and then, of course, there's things like AML and KIC. There's things like, for instance, if you are trading or if you are doing banking or if you're doing even savings or pensions. So there's a lot of things moving, and there's as well an increasing process of digitalization. So we still have to use paper for a lot of things, and this is the biggest challenge: is how can we take and remove the paper transactions in a way that is safe. For instance, I interview one of the top bankers and financial experts in the world from the Asian banker, friend of mine, Emmanuel, and for instance, he was telling me that a lot of banks in Singapore that are some of the biggest banks in the world, they still rely 100% in paper. So you cannot really still do things without paper. So a lot of these things are really more on the trading side and very kind of top level financial transactions. The rest of the economy is still very paper driven. So I would say that there's a level of automation. It's still very low, I would say. And even this automation is only for some areas. For instance, for AI, for the AI, I would say that we're still not using completely AI. We're using some kind of initial machine learning. And the only people using more advanced things on this area are really the really big data hedge funds or big banks that have like a very big trading division. So I would say, to answer more directly, digital transformation will have to be across the board of the business division, actually more than the IT division. The problem is never the IT division, is the business division. And if the business decisions makers don't understand, which is still a big problem. Okay, I've been interviewing and even being in conference with a lot of C-level personalities that don't understand any of this. And I always get nervous for them because, of course, if you are in a leadership position, you can actually save your job for a couple of years still, but you are killing your company. And I think if they don't understand, you can never take the digital transformation to the organization. And this is the biggest challenge, is how you do this. And there's another paradox that I think is important, especially on the question of the IT. There's a difference between IT legacy systems and IT infrastructure and digital transformation. So a lot of people have fantastic IT digital infrastructures. They have zero digital skills. And this is the part for me that is the challenge, because if you have zero digital skills, you will never be able to use AI, because AI is all about digital and data. So the challenge here is how you're going to be making this bridge divide, and how you're going to be coaching, training, and making sure that these different teams understand, because in the end of the day, from the top bottom, everyone needs to understand the digital levels, and it's not the IT, because the IT in the end of the day is the plumbing. Okay, the plumbing, as long as the plumbing is correctly set up, and at the moment is mostly in cloud computing systems, you have that done. That is not, of course, you can always be hacked, but normally the hacking, for instance, if you look at just a simple example, the biggest hacking, probably one of the biggest in history of Panama Papers, was done through a simple hack of a WordPress template. So that means the biggest corporations in the planet were hacked because they were being used by a company in Panama that was using a simple WordPress website, and those emails were very easy to hack. This is still the case of most of the trading houses in the world, and investment funds, VCs. They have very bad websites. They have very bad digital systems. They might be managing billions of dollars of transactions, and sometimes they have really very bad sites. And this is kind of, for me, the biggest challenge. I would say that the biggest challenge here, and the benefits of digital transformation, is if the increase is not so much the automation, is the digital transformation across the organization, because the automation will only be useful if the organization is prepared for that. Otherwise, the automation will create more issues, because you can have automation of one thing, but then, for instance, this happened a lot. I'm in the UK, which is one of the leading financial centers in the world, and I'm in London, and I see that even the banks I deal with, and they are very big banks, their departments don't speak with each other. And I'm talking, even I have, as a digital expert and as a financial expert, I always see things, sometimes it's just, oh my God, these guys are really just heading for disaster. But the challenge as well, and I think it's important for this question, is that there's a lot of layers. And the layers is, I said, there's the digital transformation, that is your question. and how this goes as digital transformation increases for automation. But the automation can only work if there's really data target to the people you have. And as well that your IT, and not just IT, your IT environment is, like I mentioned, 90% is cloud computing driven software as a service or platform as a service. But the challenge is how all these different divisions are talking with each other. And then top down, people understand, okay, the other day is your audience that counts. Who cares about automation? If you're not serving your client, they will go to another place. And that's why Silicon Valley is taking over. That's why the biggest, at the moment, if you see the biggest players in fintech in the planet are Amazon, it's becoming Google, Apple. And these guys have 10 times more valuations than all the other banks in the world. So, and then you have the same in China. In China, kind of Alibaba with Ant Financials and all the stuff, they are the biggest players in finance. Okay. So this is already happening as we speak. So I think right now it's just a question of the retail banks that really don't become platforms as a service for their communities. The automation is kind of worthless if you don't really understand that you have to serve your audience. Then you can have automation. And your audience is much more, okay, what service you are really doing to your audience. And for instance, if you look at the valuation of Revolut or other unicorns like even Robinhood, which is worth a massive, and they might have an IPO. Revolut is $35 billion, okay, and Revolut is all more or less automated, but they still have a customer center that has quite substantial capacity and so forth. But they're really becoming one of the biggest, in terms of numbers, banks in Europe, at least, let's put it that way. So I think definitely I see a lot of velocities, but we have to separate because each sector has its needs. Definitely all the top trading, definitely everything's already automated, but the other layers are still very far ahead from that. So it's a big complex question, but your question is quite big as well.
Sure. And I think the critical thing there is that then from the legacy banks or someone, does it make sense to use the AI capabilities or they become an AI firm by themselves? How do they go about it?
I would say that every company needs to become an AI firm. If you don't become an AI firm, and when I say AI firm, is more, AI is very subjective, okay? Because at the moment you're not still in AI. We are using machine learning, different systems, deep learning, big data understanding, and big data analytics, and so forth. So that's kind of the stage we are. The automation is mostly machine learning driven. There's no really very big intelligence on that. And even to process big AI capacity, you need to have a huge amount of data and a huge amount of capacity. So that means, to answer to your question, is that I think the concept of AI is that every organization in the world has to become an artificial intelligence-driven company. And this parts to the concept of digital transformation, because digital transformation and AI are touching each other. For instance, a simple example is my phone knows that I'm moving in a particular time of the day. It knows when I'm going to bed. And this is pure sensors. Okay, this is not, it's the AI and the sensors, it's IoT, and the IoT knows that, okay, from a mechanic perspective and mathematical perspective, okay, that's 24 hours in your day. From these 24 hours, you are 7 on your phone, or 5 or 6, depends on how much digital you are, and that depends on your quality of life. And then he knows as well that at this time of the day, you're going to be doing something. For instance, today I was checking my phone, and my phone was telling me that, okay, do you want to call this person? Because I normally call these people at the day, but it was the AI telling me that. And this is already completely artificial intelligence driven. So there's no human interaction here. So that means they know that I normally do this. So there's the data, and my data tells me, okay, every day I call this person. So we will appear immediately. Do you want to call this person? So this is a small example of how AI is permitting every moment of our lives. So I think the challenge, and as well, for instance, if you make a search in Google, of course, it will appear probably, if it's a brand that is big, it will appear all over your different channels, and probably even will pop up in your device, depending on what device you have. The challenge right now, I think, with the kind of making companies kind of artificial intelligence, that most of the people don't even understand the concepts. And I'm talking not just for the people on the main street, I'm talking for corporates. And as well, this complexity that has to be told in a simple way is the biggest challenge. And this is where I think the companies with good education, good training, and of course organizations like yours are very important, and YouTube channels and the podcasts like this, because we have to learn. Every day I'm being coached and trying to learn with the best in the world. And I think that's the great thing about nowadays, is that you can learn a lot, but things that are very complex as well, depends of your industry. And of course, in financial industry is one of the most complex ones, because you're dealing with money, you're dealing with value, you're dealing with assets.
Got it. And now, from a digital transformation perspective, for finance teams and for finance leaders, how do you kind of go about investing into people and ensuring that they are technology first processes and they're executing it correctly?
It's a complex question, because when it comes to people, there's no two people are equal. And actually, I've been managing hundreds of people in my life, sometimes thousands, or directly or indirectly. But what I've been learning is, the most important thing is the culture and the capacity to adapt and to learn. And I think the biggest challenge for me is not so much the technology, is the mind frame. Because you are in India, I'm in London, I'm Portuguese, French, you are Indian culture educated. Each of us have different kind of, it's like if you look at the metaphor, I love a quote from Harari, that we have a cultural IP, or actually this is more my concept, but the idea of you have an intellectual property that comes from your culture, from your religion, or from even your family background and culture and whatever. But there's as well, if you look at an operating system, every culture has an operating system. So for instance, in Europe, we have an operating system that comes from Christian, Jewish values. Over there, you have the Indian, of course, values of the caste system. You have other values. And when it comes to this, sometimes this has to be told out of the technology. And there's another part that for me, at least in the last, I would say 5 years, increasingly became more important for me, is understand how entrepreneurial driven people are. And this is kind of the biggest challenge right now for me, for business, is that people that are not entrepreneurial or don't think on an entrepreneurial level have a big problem in our society, because they will become, and I will be careful how I say this, they'll become the second stage citizens. Because this is the biggest risk in our stage of humanity development, is that as we automate society, a lot of people don't want to think for themselves. They want to just be told what to do. This doesn't work with technology, because technology will do that. So you don't need to have humans doing that. So it's kind of our role as humans is going to be the biggest challenge with this stage of humanity, especially with artificial intelligence. And I think this is kind of, for me, the most important thing that I think is missing big time. It's missing because the organizations that don't prepare and that's the book of Startup of Me from Reid Hoffman that I suggest everyone to research. And I really believe that every one of us is a startup. Even me as a CEO, there are people working for me. Every people that work for me or work with me, they have to be an entrepreneur. And if they're not entrepreneurs, they will never understand AI. They will never understand what you're talking about. And this thing of life balance is going to become more blurred. Of course, we have to make a good quality of balance. But the challenge is that with our machines interacting with us 24/7, by all senses, knowing how much we sleep, knowing our lifestyle, knowing every detail about our lives, we are already becoming cyber citizens or cyber humans, because in the end of the day, we are always with the device, or two or three. So these devices are part of our life, part of the way we even interact with you. For instance, I might look at my phone during this interview because I will have some kind of notification, even if I should not do it. And even if I'm with my children, I will probably be bombarded because I have someone from my team asking me or someone calling me. So these things are really interacting in the financial world as well, because any person that works in a bank will have this. And as well, especially with COVID, this has been accelerating, because what is happening with COVID is that all this automation right now became mainstream, because things will take probably 10 years to go are becoming much faster. So I would say that this is going to be the biggest challenge for a company to be an AI driven, is the culture and all these different things. And I believe that there's a sense of responsibility from all of us, especially people that are the target audience of this podcast and your community here, is that we have a massive responsibility, especially the ones of us working in these organizations, because we can let this go very bad, or it can actually make this a bit more. And it's all about our ethics and sense of identity. So I would say that the companies, and that's why ESG, environmental, sustainability and governance are becoming increasingly more important, because it's kind of, you cannot just put one thing, technology in one side, people in another one, and AI. And AI is taking everything. AI is everything. Okay, AI is about philosophy, is about ideas and the data, and as well is about your behavior. It's about behavior, a lot about behavior. So that means I think AI is just a set of tools that are the part of the tools of our society. Like the printing was in the part, the challenge is that printing made a massive challenge and fire in the previous iterations of humanity. And the AI is going to be much more complex, because in the end of the day, we're going to create superhumans. And these superhumans that we're already creating, and part of us that are in financial industry will have superpowers to disrupt an entire country or disrupt an entire economy or create billion-dollar companies. That's the challenge that we have here.
Sure, that's valuable advice there, Dinis. And some advice for the businesses in adopting transformative technologies. How should they go about it?
I think the most important thing is, well, first of all, listen to projects like yours. I think it's really important. But I would say that what I'm trying to do, ironically, right now is when I hire someone, and I'm still doing a lot of mistakes like any entrepreneur, is making sure that the people that come to your organization, they understand the language, they understand the tools, but they understand as well the sense of digital that is around everything you're doing. And this is normally the biggest challenge that I see for any business, because if you don't get this culture of continuous transformation and continuous understanding of the digital, you won't succeed. And this is very serious. For instance, I have a challenge even with young people is I have to be very aggressive in the sense, if you're not digital, you should not be working in my company. And to be honest, when I give a chance of having people in my company that are really a bit lazy on the digital, these people become a failure. Even if I love the people, because they're not really understanding that it's not the kind of life, they cannot work on these jobs. And this is a big problem for society, is that if you have this kind of people in your organization that don't want to understand digital, they don't want to learn, you have a problem. Your company will not progress. You might have a stable business, but it's just a question of time until the company just will collapse. Because the path of change, it's so big. For instance, if you look at the quantity of multi-billion-dollar companies being created in the space of 1 year and die in the space of 2 or 3, and this is companies of billions of dollars, okay? And the quantity of wealth being created from out of nothing. And you see that in the financial industry, how much financial unicorns you have that are being created that are right now bigger than a lot of banks. And of course, if you go, and this is all over the world, over there in India, the quantity of unicorns is massive right now, but they disappear very fast as well. So it's a path of human culture and technology. But the three things have to be aligned. And then, of course, it's about focus. So I would say the biggest thing is focus. Okay, you don't need to know everything. But if you are in an industry like finance and all these financial services and banking and so forth, for IT, come on, if you're not on technology, if you don't understand the tools of your day, don't come to this technology. Get a calmer life. There's other industries like meditation and the well-being that will become massive. But even you need to use digital for that. But it's slightly different approach, because on these industries, you can actually still have a kind of a different life balance. And I think this is the challenge, that most of the people still think they can have this kind of, okay, I can use technology just a bit. No, you cannot use it a bit. You have to draw. It's like I always use the metaphor of Matrix. Okay, you get the pill, and when you get the pill, you see the world in a different way. Or you see the world in a different way. You understand that it becomes natural for you, or then don't really get into this industry. So I think that's the biggest challenge with digital transformation. You really have to take the pill. And this starts by everyone, not just by one person. And everyone has to walk the talk, okay? Because it's a continuous game that is changing every day.
Yeah, so it's no longer an option. You have to take it. It's just
Take
that
it.
some people take it immediately, some take it later down the road.
Yeah, if you don't take it, I don't think you have a business. It's just a question of time. You might have some kind of, there's always a kind, one thing I learned, there's companies that are like, I would say like zombie companies. And actually, it's interesting. I think you should, I have to write an essay about that. There's the zombie economy. Is that an economy that is moving because no one disrupted them? So that there's a couple of companies that's just moving because, okay, there's some money coming there. And for instance, I think If you look at, for instance, Kodak was an interesting example. Kodak was invented, it's a very classic example. But what is interesting is that they had the biggest buildings in New York. They were told you have to get out of the buildings because this is too expensive. It doesn't make any sense. They invented digital camera that you didn't use anything. And for instance, Nokia is another great example. It was at a certain point the biggest mobile phone. This was just 10 years ago. And now they're nothing, okay, compared with what they had. So I think this goes very fast as well. Actually, Steve Jobs said one thing very interesting is that although they are the biggest corporation on the planet, or one of them, is they can be disrupted in the space of 5 years very easily. So this capacity to keep changing and keep moving, it has to be as well not about kind of a negative way. For me, it's cool, okay, but I love it. But for instance, when I see people in my team that don't understand it, I have to be honest as well to tell them, you don't need to be in my company. There's other jobs. Just go and get other jobs. And I think this is the same that every company needs to understand is, okay, you have to really walk the talk, and walk the talk in terms of capacity of productivity and handling these tools like AI and so forth, because it's going to be bigger, not smaller. So that means it's going to be at a certain point, the AI can actually do 90% of our stuff. So it'll be much more our capacity to being creative and thinking out of the box that will make us special. The challenge is this is going to have a lot of repercussions for the world economy, and most of the government. Actually, my last book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, Reinventing a Nation, is precisely about that. And I managed to convince the government of Malaysia to use part of the book, but it's the challenge we have on this.
Got it. I mean, in terms of the out-of-box thinking, one of the reports we just mentioned that by 2025, most of the transactions will be touchless. There's going to be AI, automation, and blockchain. What's your take on that prediction?
I think it's going to be more. So I think the challenge right now is that I would say the part that I'm more excited, but as well more aware is, okay, the next 5 years are going to be more disruptive than most of the history of humanity. And I'm talking humanity, all the societies. Actually, my new book is called Society 5.0. And if you look, what is interesting with the last 4 iterations of society, we are in the 4.0, more or less, society, or fourth industrial revolution, is that all the last 4 revolutions were done in the last 200 years. Okay, it was not like the 40,000 years of humanity evolution. And in the last 200 years, we did more disruption as humans, as in our brain, than the last iterations of evolution of the last humanity since we exist. So that means the next 5 years or 10 are going to be the same as last 40,000, okay? Because we are effectively living with a phone, okay? And this is already a process of me. It's a process of my end. It's a process of the senses interacting with me. I'm already a machine in some ways, okay? Or at least I'm a process of a machine. But this doesn't talk about bioengineering, doesn't talk about a lot of other things. And this is all happening as we speak. For instance, I remember 2 years ago or 3, I did a conference and I decided to be provocative, and I call it hacking the DNA of humanity. And ironically, it was a kind of metaphor. But the point is that I started researching my own kind of ideas, and there were already universities actually digitizing DNA and hacking the DNA. This has been happening in the last 10 years, okay? And so we're going to have, and this is actually, if you look at Homo Deus from Harari, and if you look at a lot of other books, Singularity, which is a book I think everyone should look as well. All these books are talking about this. I think the challenge right now is how we take the kind of more like doom scenarios to the practicality. And for instance, I love people like Ben Gorsley, they are friends and people I respect a lot. I think we need to create open human AI and the super intelligent society that can actually coexist, but as well that this automation is not just done to create the zombie humans. And I think that's the biggest risk right now, is that you can create a series of zombie humans that we have actually in most of the films and narratives of science fiction. And I always talk about 2 narratives. Okay, you have kind of different narratives in science fiction. You have like the Star Trek narrative, the humans still control technology for the next like 1,000 years. And you have, and technology is used for good and more or less to support us. And then you have the narrative of Blade Runner, which we are actually getting into that. And the Blade Runner is like 2 corporations control humanity, and then a dystopian human android community and society. We are in the middle of both. It's already happening. I think the Androids were still in the beginning, but we start, for instance, David Anson as well, someone I deeply respect, that creates Sophia the robot. Sophia the robot is the most non-military advanced robot in the planet, but what it can do already is already very disruptive, to say less. So imagine what is going to happen in the next 5-10 years. And this is pure, I'm talking not really singularity, because the next as well depends of when we're going to have singularity, these things are going to be. So I would say automation, touchless, and these things, this is a no-brainer. It's already, I think everyone needs to have it. And I think the companies that don't have it, okay, it's just a question of time. They will be taken by someone else, or will be just become obsolete. But I would believe that the most important thing, and this is where I more than the prediction, I want to be an activist, and I would like everyone to listen to us, to be an activist, is don't wait for things to happen, act. And I would say that all the organizations I've been working, I have always a bit of a, besides my business role to make money and to make business, because a business needs to make money, is making sure people understand the tools and use the tools. So the education, the training, the coaching, it's the critical element. Because if your team is learning, if your team is part of this, they will partly, of course, if they don't have, if they're not entrepreneurs, if they don't have this spirit, it's more difficult, because you can teach them everything, they will just go home and they don't care. But if you care, and to be honest, you cannot be in business without caring. It doesn't matter how senior you are, you have to care for your business and you have to look at this. So I would say this is some of my notes. Of course, this could go for a lot of different things, but that's what I've been preaching and trying to do it on my own and learning with my mistakes as well.
That's a very interesting point, because I always say that people who just say this is the job that you've been given and go out and do it, that's kind of like the 100-year-old factory mindset, which is to happen then. Today, I don't think you need to tell people what to do. I think a lot of the times they want to kind of figure it out themselves, go out there and solve it. So a lot of the times you just tell people, find your problem that you want to solve and go ahead and do it. And I think that's the mindset that you need everyone in the organization to also have. I think the other question I had was, in terms of, now that you've seen the whole financial industry from so close, what are the top digital priorities that you see within the next 1 year or 3 years or 5 years, and where you see that the CEO should actually be focusing on?
So I would say there's two kind of priorities. One is technological priorities, which we've been talking partly, like using automation tools, AI chatbots, especially advanced CRMs that can understand your data and can actually integrate the different data point systems. That is kind of, I would say, open APIs are going to be increasingly more important, and especially machine learning driven, very basic automation tools are going to be critical. I would say as well that anything that is about project management driven internal and external relationships with your clients, because I think one of the things a lot of banks are taking really very wrong is that they think they can automate, but they forget the relationships. And you have to increasingly build, it's a bit like tailor systems using technology that can actually tailor the needs of your clients. If you don't do that, for instance, I've been having the most schizophrenic things that I'm working with an organization with top management, and then I'm a client of the organization, and I see that I have, even if I go to 2 different locations of the organization, the 2 locations are telling me 2 different things. And this actually has been happening in some most awkward ways. So there's still a huge level of disconnect between internal organizations. And for me, this is the biggest challenge. So the tools are critical. We discussed some of the tools. You have it here, from machine learning driven tools, AI chatbots, open API and open banking, machine learning tools to look at data, process management driven data, even automation, but as well digitalization tools and project management tools are really important. That's point one. Then on the other point that for me is as equally important is continuous education tools. And this continuous education tools is not just for your employees, but for your clients as well. Because you have to engage with your clients and do kind of surveys, but understanding what your client needs and engage with your client. It might be gamification technology, which I think is going to be critical important. And then another thing that I think the crypto industry and the DeFi industry is doing that is right now bringing a huge wave of disruption is that they are gamifying all their systems. For instance, I think Coinbase is doing fantastic work in terms of gamifying the way you learn about the new coins they put there. And this is massive because you are learning and you are trading and you make money on that. So this is going to be the increase because you have the same point is automation, but you are actually creating value for your client. So it comes back to creation of value. And I think this kind of gamification levels of education and understanding makes your client, instead of just getting a boring survey, because I did this week a very boring survey for the UK government, and I did it as a citizen. But if it would be gamified, it would be 10 times more interesting. And I think they will learn more, because a lot of the questions were very subjective. So that means from a data perspective, probably it's worthless. If I'm looking from an AI perspective, looking at that, because it's kind of okay, you ask one question, but it's still very subjective. And a lot of these things are still manual, okay? But if the person would be interacting with me with some kind of gamification, I would be cool enough to recommend and to do other things. So I think this is the things that I mentioned, of course, Coinbase, which is, of course, a multi-billion-dollar industry that has been on the bridge of conventional finance and non-conventional finance. And I think this is kind of the bridges. And I would say that decentralized finance, DeFi, the NFT industry right now, for me, it's one of the massive things, because it's going to be creating digital certifications for most of the industries in the world. For instance, if you look at just this year, we are close to $3 billion of transactions in NFTs, and NFTs didn't exist last year. So this is 1 year. And the transactions of and actually is in India, Polygon, which is becoming the biggest one, is actually an Indian, mostly the team is based on India. So I would say what I feel about, for instance, looking at NFTs, and even for me that I know NFTs and I've been one of the leading people in blockchain for the last since blockchain exists, is I know from the CryptoKitties, they were the first kind of NFT examples that I would never expect suddenly to be the mainstream part of blockchain that became more senior, more kind of society driven, because crypto is different is more still about trading and investment. But the NFTs are right now going to disrupt the entire industry, because everyone can use an NFT to make a transaction, to have a certification, to buy a piece of art, to buy a collective, to buy even for advertisement. Because for instance, if I do advertisement at Google, I'm giving my data to Google, and Google eventually will give me some stuff. And then I will have to use other tools as well for advertisement. So this is going to be a huge wave of new things, as I'm touching a lot of different areas. But I believe that especially the centralized versus decentralized systems are going to be the most complex ones and most radical ones, because you can create entire economies very fast that will disrupt entire industries and countries. And it's happening already, because if you see the size of Ethereum, the size of all these tokens, for instance, Polygon, which is an example of a company of technologies, is right now worth close to $10 billion. And this is kind of 1 year old. so it's kind of, it's not just in the conventional finance. This is still, you are trading it. Okay, you can trade it officially in Coinbase. And this is actually happening. And they are as well building very serious technology. So I would say that conventional, traditional finance, non-traditional finance, and all these systems are right now, it's becoming a bit of a cyberpunk kind of ecosystem, because you cannot underestimate one versus the other. I remember that 5 years ago, when I started really becoming more into blockchain, and I remember that a couple of friends of mine told me, don't even mention crypto to any one of your financial, because I work in banking. Actually, I created the bank. Don't mention that, because you will be thrown out of the system. I had actually a couple of people telling me this. Now it's mainstream, and it's $1 trillion plus economy, which is, the world economy is around $80 trillion. So we're starting to have around 10% of the world economy that is crypto. So this is becoming real, and we are in the beginning. Okay, so that means, and I'm not here defending crypto, I'm just saying that we cannot just look at things, okay, let this guy, no, crypto, I don't want to touch. And I remember, even for instance, just an example is like big investment banks. And I had a conference with some of them, and they were saying, can you explain to me about this thing of blockchain? You have an entire department working on that. Do you know that? I didn't know that.
So this has been super interesting, Dinis. Thanks a lot for this interesting talk. And we just thank you for being on this particular podcast and helping out with all of the listeners here. To continue watching engaging discussions in the space of technology, subscribe to Conversations on AI. You can follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thank you so much, Vikram. And for everyone else, just be active. Don't let things happen. Thank you.
Thanks.